Look at the pressure building on this glass surface. It does not shatter immediately, but microscopic fractures spread until the structure fails entirely. This is exactly what happens in organizations when managers rely solely on intuitive, common-sense empathy to handle employee stress. It feels right in the moment, but it fails to prevent systemic burnout. The reality of human resources has shifted. A manager's responsibility now includes the active management of a highly diverse set of psychological mindsets, securing both the physical and mental well-being of their teams. To do this effectively, leadership has to evolve. Passive advice, simply suggesting an employee take a few days off, rarely resolves root issues. Managers must instead deploy structured, clinical psychological methodologies to stabilize their workforce. The stakes are entirely quantifiable. Implementing effective organizational counseling builds baseline resilience, reduces employee turnover, and maintains a productive, healthy atmosphere, even under tight deadlines. Treating human behavior as a complex architectonic system that can be mapped and managed is the defining trait of successful modern management. To understand how to apply these clinical tools, we have to look at how they were engineered. In the 1900s, the field originated in the United States strictly as vocational guidance. Frank Parsons, recognized as the father of this movement, focused entirely on matching individuals to the right industrial jobs. This photograph captures the formal group dynamic necessitated by World War II. The scale of trauma caused by the war mandated a shift toward clinical mental health interventions within these systemic counseling environments. By the 1950s and 60s, the rise of psychology officially established counseling as a distinct profession. It broke away from the strictly medical model of psychiatry, allowing practitioners to treat mental health issues without treating the subject as a diseased patient. The practice matured through the 1980s and 90s. Regulatory bodies like the American Counseling Association introduced formal licensure and rigorous ethical standards, ensuring that interventions were backed by verifiable clinical science. Modern organizational counseling is the result of a century of refined clinical responses to mass human trauma and large-scale economic shifts. Before a manager can apply any specific intervention, they must establish a baseline operational posture. In the 1950s, psychologist Carl Rogers introduced person-centered therapy, which serves as the foundational operating system for any institutional counseling relationship. This matrix maps out the architecture of trust. It is a required 4-pillar framework that managers must construct to effectively engage their employees. Let's break down the quadrants. The first quadrant is congruence. This means the manager must maintain absolute authenticity. Congruence establishes a functional system of trust and confidentiality by ensuring the manager's internal state matches their outward expression. The second quadrant highlights unconditional positive regard. This requires a strictly non-judgmental approach, treating the employee with consistent dignity and respect, engaging them as a complex human being. Quadrant 3 is empathetic understanding. This is the operational requirement to view the problem entirely from the client's perspective, mapping their internal reality without imposing outside assumptions. The final quadrant completes the matrix with self-actualization. This is the innate human drive to grow beyond basic financial needs, to achieve inner satisfaction. A manager must tap into this drive to motivate meaningful contribution. Without this 4-pillar baseline of trust and equity, the employee will immediately reject any further psychological or managerial interventions you attempt to deploy. Once that baseline is established, managers must act as diagnosticians, identifying the specific nature of the friction to select the correct theoretical tool. The first tool is the psychoanalytical approach, pioneered by Sigmund Freud. This framework focuses on how a person's unconscious mind, childhood experiences, and ingrained defense mechanisms shape their current behaviors in the workplace. Behavioral theory offers a different perspective. As illustrated by B.F. Skinner and his conditioning experiments, this theory asserts that workplace behavior is learned through environmental feedback and can be permanently unlearned. Managers can apply the behavioral approach through systematic desensitization. This involves gradually exposing an employee to a stressor in controlled increments to modify their conditioned response to that stress. The manager's task is to determine whether an employee's failure is rooted in deep-seated defensive posturing or simply a poorly conditioned habit that requires behavioral modification. When an employee's performance is blocked by negative thought loops, managers can deploy the cognitive theory developed by Aaron Beck. This flowchart maps out cognitive dissonance, the mental conflict that occurs when a person holds contradictory beliefs. By charting these patterns, a manager can introduce a logical intervention node to correct the contradiction and resolve the issue. When we expand this model, we get cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. It integrates Beck's cognitive mapping with Skinner's behavioral techniques. The physical action node added here, representing exercises like structured breathing, actively dampens the rerouted thought process. CBT empowers managers to implement active, practical management protocols for acute anxiety, replacing passive listening with the technical engineering of solutions. Deploying these frameworks is a strict institutional mandate in high-pressure environments. In India, guidelines from the NCERT and regulatory frameworks from the University Grants Commission now mandate trained counselors in affiliated schools. Look at the body language of these students. Institutional counselors manage severe stressors, including JEE and NEET exam anxiety, navigating peer bullying and heavy family expectations. High-stakes institutional management often utilizes solution-focused theory. In this diagram, notice how the straight vector completely bypasses the tangled node of past grievances, shooting directly toward future outcomes. Solution-focused theory directs all therapeutic energy entirely onto future solutions and improvements, refusing to dwell on past problems. In environments where time and pressure are critical, whether a competitive exam or corporate deadline, these forward-looking interventions are often the most effective stabilizing force available. Creating a complete managerial system requires combining the foundational posture with the advanced toolkit. The specific interventions, CBT, behavioral, and solution-focused theories, dock into the center of the initial Rogers matrix to create a unified structural blueprint. Whether addressing a senior executive's burnout or a student's exam anxiety, the underlying psychological mechanisms and the clinical responses required to manage them remain identical. Applying this architecture yields measurable outcomes: restored work-life balance, resilient team morale, and a quantifiable reduction in turnover. Effective management is the science of deploying clinical frameworks to architect a productive, physically and mentally healthy human atmosphere.